Part 1: The Grand Gesture. Saving for years, I planned the ultimate family trip. One that would outshine every holiday memory, and show my gratitude to my mother-in-law, Amiel. She'd been our unwavering support during rough patches. Like when my wife went back to school while we were juggling toddlers and bills. She'd step in without hesitation, cooking meals, babysitting, and even helping with our mortgage a few times. So when I got promoted and had the chance to do something extraordinary, I decided to give her an experience she'd never dream of affording herself. A 2-week European luxury trip for all of us. First-class flights, 5-star hotels, private tours, and even a dinner reservation at a Michelin-starred restaurant. It was a lineup of bucket list experiences that would take her out of her small-town comfort zone and into a world of grandeur. The planning took months. I coordinated with tour guides in Rome, booked a private canal ride in Venice, and arranged for a surprise stay in a countryside villa in France. I even had her passport expedited because she'd never left the country before. Each step, I kept imagining the awe on her face. The quiet, soft-spoken woman who gave so much but never asked for anything in return. The day of the trip finally arrived. The house was buzzing with last-minute packing chaos. My wife was running around double-checking everything. The kids were more excited about snacks than international travel, and my Amel was her usual calm self, quietly sipping tea. "It's just a trip," she said when I caught her smiling. "It's the trip," I corrected, nudging her gently. At the airport, I felt the weight of all that I'd planned. Watching the kids marvel at the planes outside the windows, I was already imagining their faces when we saw the Eiffel Tower or tasted gelato in Italy. My Amael, though, seemed oddly quiet. She clutched her bag tightly and stayed glued to her phone, typing furiously. I figured it was nerves. Flying for the first time at her age could be daunting. As we navigated security and made it to the gate, she asked me to grab a coffee with her. Now my Amael has always been predictable. She's a tea person through and through. So her sudden craving for coffee felt strange. Still, I went along, thinking it was her way of calming herself. In the cafe line, she was fidgety. Her phone buzzed repeatedly, and she kept glancing at the screen like she was waiting for some critical update. "Everything okay?" I asked, trying to lighten the mood. "Oh, fine. Just making sure everything's in place," she said with a weak smile. We grabbed the coffee, and I joked that it wasn't the kind of Italian espresso we'd soon be drinking. She nodded but barely reacted. On the way back to the gate, I noticed her slowing down like she was stalling. When we finally arrived, the boarding call was already echoing overhead. My wife waved at us, exasperated. "Where were you two?" "We're boarding." That's when Emil turned to me, gripping her bag like a lifeline. She leaned in close, her voice trembling. "I need to stay back," she whispered. "What? What are you talking about?" "The plane's leaving. This is your trip," I said, stunned. Her face was hard to read, a mix of guilt and determination. "I can't explain now," she muttered, shoving her passport into my hand. "Just go. I'll catch up later." Before I could process what she'd said, she turned and walked away, disappearing into the crowded terminal. I called after her, but the gate agent was already waving us in. My wife, frantic, grabbed my arm. "What's going on? Why is she leaving?" I had no answers, just her passport in my hand and a gnawing sense of betrayal in my gut. Part 2: Left Behind. As the boarding agent called for the final group, I stood frozen at the gate, staring at my Amiel's retreating figure. She disappeared into the terminal crowd, her small frame swallowed by the sea of travelers. Her words echoed in my head. "I can't explain now." What was there to explain? This was her dream trip, the one I'd spent months planning and saved tens of thousands for. And she was walking away without so much as a proper explanation. My wife's voice snapped me back to reality. "What's going on? Where is she?" she demanded, balancing our 2 squirming kids who were more interested in the oversized luggage tags dangling from their carry-ons. She said she had to stay back," I mumbled, still clutching the passport she'd shoved into my hands. "Stay back? What does that even mean?" My wife's voice was sharp, the panic creeping in. "She doesn't know how to travel on her own. She's never even been on a plane." I didn't have an answer. The gate agent gave us a warning look. "Sir, ma'am, are you boarding or not?" The kids were getting restless, and the impatient line behind us was starting to grumble. Torn between the confusion of my Amiel's sudden disappearance and the pressure to move forward, I made the call. "We'll sort it out when we land," I said, though I wasn't sure who I was trying to reassure, my wife or myself. We shuffled onto the plane, and the kids immediately dove into their travel kits, oblivious to the tension radiating between us. My wife was gripping the armrest so tightly her knuckles turned white. "She's alone," she said under her breath, almost to herself. "I'll call her as soon as we land," I said, hoping it would calm her down. But as the plane took off, doubt gnawed at me. Why would she stay back? She had seemed excited about the trip. She had thanked me repeatedly for arranging it. Was it nerves? Or something worse? The flight should have been a celebration. I had imagined my wife and I toasting with champagne in our roomy first-class seats, the kids giggling as they explored their new surroundings. Instead, it felt like a cloud of anxiety hung over us. My wife kept checking her phone, as if expecting a message that would clear everything up. It never came. When we landed, I called Emil immediately. It went straight to voicemail. I called again. Same result. My wife tried texting her, but there was no response. "Something's wrong," she said, her voice shaking. I tried to stay calm. Maybe she's just sorting something out. She'll call back once she's settled. Settled where? We're supposed to be in Paris. My wife was getting louder, drawing the attention of a few fellow travelers who passed us in the terminal. I had no answers. We decided to head to the hotel and regroup. Maybe she'd call. Maybe she'd show up on a later flight. But deep down I knew something wasn't right. At the hotel I scrolled through my phone trying to piece things together. Had she been acting strange in the days leading up to the trip? She'd seemed a little distant but chalked it up to excitement. I replayed the moment at the airport in my mind, her fidgeting with her phone, her stalling on the way to the gate. And then it hit me, her texts. She had been glued to her phone all morning, typing like her life depended on it. Who had she been messaging? And why hadn't I questioned it? My wife was pacing the hotel room, biting her nails. What if something happened to her? What if she was too scared to tell us? I tried to stay optimistic. Let's give it a day. She might just need time to figure things out. She knows how much this trip meant to everyone. But even as I said it, a knot of suspicion formed in my gut. Something about her disappearing act didn't feel random. It felt deliberate. And I couldn't shake the feeling that she'd been hiding something big. Part 3, The Wait and the Discovery. That first day in Paris was anything but the dream I'd envisioned. Instead of marveling at the Eiffel Tower or strolling along the Seine, I spent it glued to my phone, alternating between unanswered calls to my Emil and trying to make sense of her vanishing act. My wife was spiraling. What if she got scammed? Or kidnapped? She asked, pacing the hotel room while the kids built forts out of the decorative pillows. Scammed by who? I asked, more exasperated than I meant to be. She's a grown woman. She's not naive. You don't know that, she snapped. She's never traveled. She probably didn't even understand half the stuff you booked for her. I bit back a retort, focusing instead on redialing Emil's number. Straight to voicemail again. The same sinking feeling in my chest tightened every time I heard her automated greeting. By the second day, my wife's nerves had shifted into anger. This isn't just nerves, she said, scrolling through Emil's Facebook. She's avoiding us. I didn't want to believe it, but there was no other explanation. Maybe she's overwhelmed, I said, trying to keep the peace. She might need time to. Overwhelmed. My wife cut me off, holding up her phone. She just liked a post from one of her friends about their cat. She's on her phone but ignoring us. I leaned over to look. Sure enough, there it was. A little thumbs-up icon under a post from her neighbor about a stray kitten. It was baffling and infuriating. We agreed to give her one more day before taking action. We tried to focus on the kids and the itinerary, hitting a few sites, but everything felt hollow. Every time my phone buzzed, I jumped, hoping it was her. It never was. On the third day, I decided to escalate. I called her best friend back home, Barbara, who was usually in the loop about everything. Barbara picked up after 2 rings, her cheerful voice immediately calming my nerves. "Allison, how's Europe?" she asked. "Well," I hesitated. "Not great. Have you talked to Emil recently?" "Talked to her." Barbara sounded surprised. "No, why?" I explained the situation, her disappearing at the airport, the radio silence, the bizarre social media activity. Barbara paused. You know, she mentioned she had some business to take care of before the trip. I didn't press her on it, but now I'm wondering. Business? I repeated. What kind of business? I don't know, Barbara admitted. She was being vague. She just said something about needing to close a chapter. I thought she was talking about cleaning her house or something. Close a chapter? My mind raced, but I couldn't make sense of it. Later that afternoon, as my wife and I sat in a cafe with the kids dozing in their strollers, I tried to piece together what I'd learned. The cryptic behavior, the texting, the sudden decision to stay behind. It all felt connected to something she hadn't told us. Just then my phone buzzed. It was a text from Emil. I need you to understand that I didn't plan for it to happen this way. Please trust me. I'll explain everything when I get back. Just enjoy the trip. My wife nearly snatched the phone out of my hands. What the hell does that mean? Didn't plan for it to happen this way? What's she talking about? I reread the message, my frustration mounting. It felt like a non-answer, and it only raised more questions. She's hiding something, my wife muttered, scrolling through her own phone. There has to be more to this. And then she froze, her eyes narrowing. What? I asked, leaning over. She turned the phone toward me. It was a photo on Facebook. A candid shot of Emil standing outside a hotel in New York City, grinning, arm in arm with a man we didn't recognize. The caption read, "So happy to reconnect after all these years. Red heart, life is short. Don't waste it." My wife's face went pale. Who the hell is that? And just like that, the mystery deepened. Part 4. Secrets Unveiled. The photo on Facebook was like a slap to the face. There was Emil, standing with a man none of us had ever seen before, looking far too comfortable for someone who was supposed to be overwhelmed by her first international trip, or stuck back home sorting out business. My wife's eyes narrowed as she zoomed in on the picture. That's not an old friend, she hissed. Look at the way she's leaning into him. That's... Her voice trailed off, but the implication was clear. I grabbed my phone and pulled up Facebook. Sure enough, the post wasn't on Emil's profile. It was on the man's. His name was Carl Hendricks, and based on his profile, he was a real estate agent in New York City. His most recent posts were filled with selfies, motivational quotes, and pictures of fancy open houses. Who the hell is Carl? I muttered, scrolling through his timeline. He's wearing a wedding ring, my wife noted, her voice icy. The caption under the photo gnawed at me. So happy to reconnect after all these years. Reconnect? From where? And how did this tie into her ditching us at the airport? We need answers, my wife said, grabbing her phone and dialing Emil again. It went straight to voicemail. She's ignoring us on purpose, she snapped, redialing with trembling hands. Let's not jump to conclusions, I said, even though I was struggling to calm my own racing thoughts. Oh, I'm already there, my wife shot back. She's lying to us, she's hiding God knows what, and she's off gallivanting with some mystery man in New York while we're here in Europe with 2 confused kids. Her voice had risen, drawing stares from other patrons in the cafe. I gently placed my hand on hers. Let's be smart about this. We'll message her, play it cool, and see if we can get her to explain. Reluctantly, my wife nodded, typing out a carefully worded message. Saw your text. Hope you're okay. Who's Carl? We saw the photo. Please just tell us what's going on. The message was read almost immediately, but Emil didn't respond. Hours passed. We wandered through Paris trying to distract ourselves with touristy things, but everything felt hollow. The Eiffel Tower sparkled in the distance, and the kids giggled as they tried their first crepes, but my wife and I were lost in our heads, both of us stewing over the growing mystery. It wasn't until we were back at the hotel that my phone finally buzzed. It was a message from Emil. I know you're upset. I'll explain when I get back. Please don't worry about me. That was it. Nothing about Carl, nothing about her sudden disappearance, and definitely no apology. I'm done, my wife said, throwing her phone onto the bed. She's treating us like children, like we don't deserve an explanation. We paid for this trip for her. And now she's off doing whatever the hell this is. I didn't know what to say. I felt every ounce of her frustration, but I also couldn't shake the image of Emil smiling in that photo. It wasn't just the betrayal. It was the sheer audacity of it. By the next morning, my wife had taken matters into her own hands. She called Barbara, her mom's best friend, and laid everything out. Barbara, do you know who Carl is? She asked bluntly. There was a long pause on the other end of the line. Carl Hendricks, Barbara finally said. Yes. Who is he? Barbara sighed heavily. You're not going to like this. Try me. Carl is, well, he's your mom's ex-boyfriend. The words hung in the air like a lead weight. Her what? My wife asked, her voice shaking. They dated years ago before she married your dad, Barbara explained. I didn't even know they were still in touch. Last time she mentioned him, it was ancient history. I leaned in closer, trying to catch every word. Why would she go see him now? My wife pressed. I don't know, Barbara admitted. But if she's with Carl, well, your mom might be trying to rekindle something. Rekindle? My head spun. Was this some midlife crisis? A rekindling of old flames at the expense of everything else, including her family? Barbara, my wife said coldly, if she doesn't call me in the next 24 hours, I'm calling her out. Publicly. Barbara tried to mediate, but my wife had made up her mind. As soon as the call ended, she turned to me, furious. This is unacceptable. She left us hanging for this guy? After everything we did for her. I didn't have an answer. All I knew was that this betrayal was deeper than I'd expected, and it was about to get even messier. Part 5: The Confrontation. By the 5th day of the trip, the tension was unbearable. My wife had shifted from anger to something colder, determination. She's not going to ruin this for me, she said that morning as we prepared for a day at the Louvre. But she will explain herself when she gets back. I admired her resolve, but I couldn't shake my own frustration. Every time I thought about Mel's disappearing act and that photo with Carl, my chest tightened. Who just abandons their family like that? And after everything I had done to make this trip unforgettable for her? Still, we did our best to enjoy the day. The kids loved the museum's vast halls and the strange, hushed atmosphere. My youngest even pointed at the Mona Lisa and loudly asked, "Why is she so small?" prompting chuckles from nearby tourists. For a moment, I thought we might finally salvage the trip. But then, during lunch at a nearby cafe, my wife's phone buzzed. It was a message from Emile, and from the way my wife's face hardened, I knew it wasn't good. She passed me the phone without saying a word. "I'll be home when you're back. There are things I need to tell you, but I don't want to ruin your trip. Just know that I'm okay and that Carl is someone important from my past." "That's it," I said, incredulous. "She's okay? She ditched us for some guy and thinks that's all we need to hear." My wife grabbed the phone back and started typing furiously. Her fingers flew across the screen as she crafted her response, her face a mix of anger and hurt. "This was your trip, Mom. We planned this for you. And you abandoned us without a word. You owe us more than a vague 'I'm okay.' You owe us the truth." She hit send and immediately started pacing. I could tell she wasn't expecting much, and neither was I. Mel had made it clear she wasn't ready to face us. By evening, we were back at the hotel, and Mel still hadn't responded. My wife was stewing, scrolling through Facebook like she was hunting for clues. Then she found something. "Look at this," she said, shoving the phone at me. It was another post from Carl. This time it was a selfie of him and Emile at a rooftop bar, the New York City skyline glittering in the background. They were holding wine glasses, both smiling like they didn't have a care in the world. The caption read, "Here's to second chances and new beginnings." Red heart. My wife exploded. Second chances? What the hell is that supposed to mean? Her voice startled the kids, who were playing quietly in the corner. I ushered them into the adjoining room with their toys, trying to shield them from the drama. When I came back, my wife was already typing another message to Emile. We saw Carl's post. Second chances? New beginnings? Is this some kind of secret relationship? You owe us an explanation now. This time, Emile replied almost immediately. It's complicated. I'll tell you everything when you're back, but I'm not ready to talk yet. Please just trust me. Trust you, my wife muttered, shaking her head. She's treating us like children, like we can't handle the truth. I tried to calm her down. Maybe she's embarrassed. Maybe she doesn't know how to explain. Embarrassed, she snapped. She should be. She abandoned us for some guy she hasn't mentioned in decades. And now she's parading around New York with him, while we're stuck here trying to make the best of this trip. She was right, of course. Emile's behavior was selfish and hurtful, and it was tainting what should have been a once-in-a-lifetime experience. The breaking point came that night. As we lay in bed, my wife staring at the ceiling and me scrolling aimlessly on my phone, she suddenly sat up. I can't do this anymore, she said. I need answers. What are you going to do? I asked, though I already knew. She picked up her phone and started drafting a message, her fingers trembling slightly. When she finished, she showed it to me. Mom, if you don't come clean about what's going on, I'm done. I mean it. You've hurt us enough. I need to know the truth or I'm cutting you off. I swallowed hard. It was harsh, but I understood why she felt it was necessary. Emile had crossed a line, and her refusal to explain herself was only making things worse. My wife hit send and tossed the phone onto the nightstand. If she doesn't respond by morning, she said, her voice tight with emotion, I'm done with her. It was an ultimatum that hung heavy in the air, and I wondered if Emile truly understood the damage she'd caused. or if she even cared. Part 6. The truth comes out. We didn't sleep much that night. My wife tossed and turned, muttering under her breath every so often, and I stared at the dark ceiling trying to predict what Emel's next move might be. Would she apologize? Explain? Or would she double down on her cryptic messages and leave us to figure it out on our own? By morning there was still no response. My wife checked her phone the moment the alarm went off, but Emil hadn't replied. "That's it," she said, her voice flat but resolute. "She's made her choice." I didn't argue. Honestly, I wasn't sure how to defend Emil anymore. We spent the day trying to move forward, visiting Versailles and taking the kids on a carousel ride near the palace gardens. For the first time in days we managed to laugh a little. It was bittersweet though. This was supposed to be a trip about family, but Emil's absence loomed over every moment. That evening back at the hotel, we finally got the message we'd been waiting for. My wife's phone buzzed and she snatched it up, her eyes scanning the screen. "It's her," she said, her tone a mix of relief and anger. I leaned over as she opened the message. It was long, much longer than anything Emil had sent so far. "I owe you the truth. I'm sorry for leaving the way I did, but I didn't know how to handle it. Carl and I were engaged years ago before I married your dad. We had a falling out, and I thought I'd never see him again. But a few months ago he reached out. He was going through a divorce and we started talking again. He asked to meet in person and I didn't know what to say. When the trip came up I thought I could leave it all behind, but when the time came to board the plane I panicked. I had to see him. I had to know if there was still something there. I'm so sorry for how this hurt you, but I needed to do this for me." The room was silent as we read her confession. My wife's face was unreadable, her emotions clearly warring inside her. "She ditched us for some guy," she finally said, her voice trembling. "She left us because she needed to see if there was still something there? Who does that?" I didn't know what to say. On the one hand, Emil's explanation made sense in a messy human way. On the other hand, her timing couldn't have been worse, and the way she went about it was unforgivable. "She betrayed us," my wife continued, pacing the room. "She betrayed me. After everything we've done for her. I reached out to her. I know you're angry. I am too. But maybe this was something she felt she had to do. It doesn't excuse how she handled it, but she could have told us," my wife snapped. "She could have been honest instead of sneaking around and ruining this trip." I nodded, knowing she was right. Emil's actions had been selfish, no matter her intentions. The next morning Emil called. My wife answered, her voice cold. "What do you want?" Emil's voice was hesitant on the other end. I needed to say I'm sorry. I know I've hurt you and I'll do whatever it takes to make it right. I didn't know how to tell you. I thought you'd judge me." "Judge you?" My wife shot back. "You lied to us. You abandoned us. You took his feelings into account but not ours. Do you have any idea what this has done to me? To my kids? To the man who spent $60,000 on a trip that was supposed to include you?" There was a long pause and for a moment I thought Emil might hang up. But then she spoke, her voice shaking. "You're right," she said. "I was selfish. I let my emotions cloud my judgment, and I hurt the people I love most. I can't change what I did, but I'll do whatever it takes to fix this." "You can start by being honest," my wife said firmly. "No more vague texts, no more excuses. If you want a second chance with us, you need to earn it." Mel promised she would. She told us she'd return to our town before we got back, and we could talk in person. When we finally got home, Elle was waiting for us at our house, looking smaller and more fragile than I'd ever seen her. She apologized again, this time face to face, and she offered to pay back some of the money for the trip. My wife listened, her expression softening slightly, but I could tell it would take time to rebuild the trust Emil had shattered. As for Carl, Emil admitted she wasn't sure what the future held, but she promised that whatever decision she made moving forward, she'd be upfront with us. It wasn't the resolution we'd hoped for, but it was a start. And as messy and complicated as it was, it reminded me that family, like life, rarely fits into neat, tidy boxes. Sometimes it's about picking up the pieces and deciding whether they're worth putting back together.